Now there is one more Excel function that we can use to generate mean for various combinations of values of variables. So let me illustrate that. So we can use the pivot table. It's a very powerful command. So here this is your 401k data. We saw this in chapter 2. So it's the same data set. Okay, so it's highlighted. So now go and insert a pivot table, and let's put the pivot table in sheet 1, and there is nothing below here, so we can prepare the pivot table right here. So everything is blank below that, so we are safe here. If we are not safe, pivot table will tell us that there is something there. Do you really want to put the pivot table here? And if there is something that we don't want to lose, then we can adjust that. Okay, so click OK. All right. So now we generated a similar pivot table in chapter 2. So we will do risk in columns, okay, and then type as rows, growth or value, okay, and then market cap below that. So within each type of fund, the market cap. Okay. Now suppose we want to look at 3-year return. Okay. And what we want here is the average return. Okay. Over 3-year period, what is the average return of all the funds that satisfy these categories? Now, since this is a numeric data, pivot table will automatically assume that what you want is a sum. Okay, but that's not what we want. We want an average, so we have to go back in here to value field setting and change that to average. If you do count, it will simply give you a count, which is what we did in chapter 2. But here we want an average value, so click OK and format. Okay. Now we want the risk, low risk to be first, and then average, and then high. So we'll move risk to the beginning. Okay. So we used pivot table to generate average in a table format for a numeric variable. Okay. So here is another way of computing averages. Now pivot table allows us to compute not just average but other statistics also, and it is very easy. All you have to do is to just click inside the pivot table, right click, and then choose value field settings. If you choose that, then you get number of options. Of course, we have already seen count. If I select count, it will only give you the number of funds that fall into each of those categories. And we just did average. Okay, so it takes the funds that fall into each category and computes the average 3-year return. So now if you wanted maximum return, you can choose max, so min, and here is the standard deviation. If the data represents the entire population, then you can choose STDEV-P, but this is only a sample, so we will choose STDEV. And we can use, if you want variance, you can use VAR instead of STDEV. So when you choose STDEV and click OK, a standard deviation will get computed. And so this pivot table gives you the standard deviation of 3-year returns that fall into each of these categories here. Now you notice that there is a div by zero error, and that's because there is only one fund that falls into that category. So if you have only one value, then you cannot have standard deviation. So for example, so if you go and change this to count, you see there's only one fund that falls into that category, and that's the reason. So let me put it back to standard deviation. So that's the reason why we have a div by zero error there.